Today we're going to talk about the prospect of a Hakeem Jeffries Speakership in the Republican-led House, and I interview former Obama spokesman and host of Pod Save America and Pod Save the World, Tommy Vitor, about the situation unfolding in Israel and Gaza, how this happened in what's supposed to be the most secure country in the world, and his response to Republicans exploiting this tragedy for their own personal gain. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So I want to talk about the prospect of a Hakeem Jeffries speakership with a Republican House majority. But first, here's the situation in the House. We are now another week down and another week without a Republican speaker. This past week, the race was between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, where Scalise had the support of 113 Republicans and Jim Jordan had the support of 99 Republicans. And so, of course, when Scalise recognized that he didn't have a majority, he dropped out. And when Jim Jordan recognized that he didn't have a majority, because he is focused solely on consolidating power for himself, he opted to stay in the race. And just as a quick aside, I think that singular moment is actually a pretty accurate microcosm for the entire far-right flank of the Republican Party, because here's Jim Jordan with nowhere close to the majority of support that he needs, and yet he sees that as a mandate to preside over everyone. Like the entire Republican Party just personified in one single person. And yet, it makes sense. NBC Sahil Kapoor tweeted, "One Republican House aide tells me he's confident Jim Jordan will get elected speaker because the people opposing him are moderates. Either he gets it or the moderates for the first time ever grow a spine." Which really is how it goes, right? The quote-unquote moderates in the GOP whine and complain about how the face of their party is Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Jim Jordan. And yet when it comes time to stand up to the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts and Jim Jordans, well, you see, we couldn't possibly do that. And so they let themselves get steamrolled by the crazies in the Republican Party because they're afraid of being primaried, and then they sit back and wonder why they're bunched together with the Looney Tunes. Yeah, one of life's great mysteries. But there might actually be another out for those House Republicans who perhaps don't want to be represented by a far-right insurrection sympathizer whose claim to fame is that he's alleged to have ignored the sexual abuse of over 100 student-athletes during his time as coach at OSU. And that is that now, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries has begun floating the idea of them crossing the aisle and supporting him.
And that's why it's so urgently necessary that the Republicans get their act together and elect a speaker from within their own ranks, as it is the responsibility of the majority party to do, or have traditional Republicans break with the extremists within the House Republican Conference and partner with Democrats on a bipartisan path forward. We are ready, willing, and able to do so. I know there are traditional Republicans who are good women and men who want to see government function, but they are unable to do it within the ranks of their own conference, which is dominated by the extremist wing, and that's why we continue to extend the hand of bipartisanship to them.
And I just want to caveat this. Is it likely that this happens? Of course not. But at this point, neither is Republicans being able to elect a speaker from their own conference. I mean, seriously, we are 2 weeks into Republicans having no speaker, and the closest they've come is Jim Jordan, who needs to flip 51 Republicans to get elected. Like, we're not talking about 5 or 10 holdouts here. We're talking about 55 holdouts, and he can afford to lose 4 of them. That's not an uphill climb. That is a vertical climb. That's him scaling a greased-up mile-high flagpole. And the thing about having your party hijacked by extremists is that they won't compromise. That is how the House Freedom Caucus operates, meaning the only person they'll settle for is another extremist like them. And so the option becomes an extremist from within the Republican conference, like Jim Jordan, or perhaps Hakeem Jeffries. Who do you think Don Bacon is more likely to vote for? Who do you think those 18 Biden district Republicans are more likely to vote for? I'm not saying they will vote for Jeffries, but what's going to be more difficult explanation back home in their districts? That they sided with a Democrat in a district that just voted for a Democrat for president? Or that they voted with Jim Jordan, the House's iteration of Donald Trump, in a district that just rejected Donald Trump? And I'll just add, at least some form of coalition government in the House would mean something might get done. I'm not sure what Republicans had intended to do with their majority, but offering up some failed bills on gas stoves probably isn't why most of those Republicans got involved in government. Compare that with what the Democrats did with their own majority, from the American Rescue Plan to the Inflation Reduction Act, the PACT Act, the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Law, the Gun Safety Law, reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, codifying marriage equality. I know it doesn't rise to the significance of waging the war on Christmas, but it's something. So again, unlikely that we see this happen, but the fact that Hakeem Jeffries is seeing the dire position that Republicans are in and for the first time making overtures may signal that something is on the horizon. And while it's not the Democrats' responsibility to save Republicans from themselves, they would be well served to take Jeffries up on his offer to do exactly that. Here's a preview of my interview with Tommy Vitor. Can you give a brief explanation of how we got here, starting with the attack on Israel just a few days back that spurred this whole recent spate of events?
Yeah, so on Saturday, Israel time, Saturday morning, the Hamas terrorist organization launched this surprise attack on Israel. It had multiple parts to it. They launched something like 2,000 rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel. There were Hamas fighters on hang gliders, literally flying over the barrier fence between Gaza and Israel. And then there were basically Hamas ground forces overrunning checkpoints and using, backhoes and trucks to break through the barrier. And they just were able to stream into parts of Israel that were along that border. And so, these towns and kibbutzes in southern Israel were quickly overrun. Villages were massacred. People were taken hostage. There's something like 1,000 casualties on the Israeli side, as the estimate I've seen. Thousands more have been wounded. So it's truly horrific, and hundreds of hostages were taken as well.
Now, Israel is ostensibly the most secure country in the world. So how did this happen?
It's a shocking intelligence failure. I mean, Israel has got one of the most powerful militaries in the world. They've got one of the best intelligence services in the world, or at least people thought. There are drones, there are satellite images, there are sensors all over that border at the Gaza Strip. So it is truly shocking that Hamas was able to penetrate and get deep into Israel like that. There's a lot of theories as to why. Clearly, the intelligence services just did not have Hamas wired as well as we might have thought they would. They didn't pick this up. Clearly, people were not watching whatever cameras or sensors or drone feeds that they have monitoring the Gaza border. And then it does seem very likely that Bibi Netanyahu had redeployed members of the Israeli military from the Gaza region to the West Bank to deal with settler violence there and to deal with, other challenges. So, there was just this confluence of events led to a catastrophe.
Republican Senator Josh Hawley came out and tweeted, Israel is facing existential threat. Any funding for Ukraine should be redirected to Israel immediately. Can you speak on Republicans using what is happening in Israel right now as a cudgel against Ukraine, which has been their, the topic that they've been looking to attack for months now?
Yeah, I saw that Josh Hawley tweet, and it was one of the dumbest, most incoherent things I've ever seen. Does he not think that the Ukrainians are facing an existential threat? I mean, they've been invaded and bombed and massacred by Russian troops for almost 2 years now. So yes, of course, I think the U.S. should quickly try to do what they can to support the Israeli government in this moment. But I also think they should be supporting the Ukrainians as they're trying to expel an occupying force in their country. I mean, so I think what's happening is Republicans just never waste a second to jump all over any kind of horrific events in the world and blame it on Joe Biden. I saw Tim Scott today said that Joe Biden has blood on his hands. What is he talking about?
Ronna McDaniel called it a great opportunity.
Called an opportunity. They think about politics first, and the rest comes after. I think that kind of hackish short-term thinking creates a political context where the United States government, all governments make bad decisions. They don't solve the underlying problem. You can't govern by press release. So Josh Hawley's just an unserious person.
To watch the full interview with Tommy, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also follow the link on the screen for the audio version of this episode. And of course, to see more of my content, the subscribe button is on the screen as well.